My name is Christina McClellan, and I'm a woman at Iowa.
I'm the Chief Curator at the University of Iowa
Marin,
Museum of Art, and I'm a woman at Iowa.
Gigi Durham. I'm an associate professor in the School of Journalism, and I'm a woman at Iowa.
Hello, and welcome to Women at Iowa, a place where the University of Iowa community can come and take pride in the accomplishments of the women who call it home. My guest today is an obstetrician and gynecologist at the University of Iowa. An activist in both the Iowa City and the University of Iowa community, she's also a former Jean Y. Jew Women's Rights Award winner. Please join me in welcoming Jill Meadows. Jill, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you. Good to
So
be here.
you grew up in Iowa City.
Yes, I'm a native.
How has it changed from thinking, back when you were growing up in Iowa City to how it is now? It's grown quite a bit.
Oh, it has. And Coralville has really taken off, and including the Coral Ridge Mall. Yeah. Used to be a lot quainter, but
you
still
still have to go up to Cedar Rapids for the big shopping.
Right. I used to say 10 minutes in any direction you'd be in countryside, and now I have to say 15 minutes. So.
Okay, so good change there.
Yeah.
So then you actually went and did your undergraduate education in Minnesota, came back to Iowa for medical school, did residency in New York. What brought you back to the University of Iowa community?
After spending 4 years in New York City, though it was a wonderful experience, I was ready to get back to the Midwest and was thinking about starting a family, wanted to be closer to my own family, and then my spouse at the time was planning to do a residency in pediatrics followed by a fellowship. So we knew we needed to be at a kind of a major academic center in the Midwest, and choices are a little bit limited, especially if you're trying to avoid then an urban area.
Right.
So
then you came back home.
Right, and there just happened to be a position open for me, and they needed somebody. The Department of OB/GYN actually had a need for another abortion provider, so it turned out to be a good fit.
Good fit. Now, what I find really interesting about you is your history in education, that you studied music, music and biology, but music as an undergrad. How do you link studying the arts and music to eventually going into medicine?
Oh, good question. I just think it's important to be well-rounded. Music has been a hobby, but I just wouldn't be able to put in the practice hours to make it a profession. For me, I wanted to keep it more on the fun side.
Right.
So in college, it was wonderful to kind of take advantage of the opportunities there, be involved in ensembles, and in my music classes I learned a lot, and actually one of my professors was involved in the kind of predecessor women's studies division, and so she inspired me and helped crystallize some of my feminism, so that's what I got out of being a music major.
Definitely. What did you play?
The harp.
The harp.
The harp.
Not an easy instrument to learn, is it?
No. So, but very fun. Now it's a beautiful piece of furniture.
Yeah.
I still bring it out for special occasions, and someday want to get back to it. But
yeah, definitely. So why did you decide to go into medicine? Who motivated you, or what forces motivated you?
Well, my father's a physician. I have lots of physicians in my family, uncles and cousins and whatnot. So I just kind of grew up being familiar with medicine, observing his life firsthand, and knowing that I could do it too. I mean, just a confidence booster to see these people, but be able to keep up with them and see that it can be done. What was the other part of your question?
Oh, and anything that you had done, as in college or even younger, that kind of inspired you to pursue medicine?
Well, I always liked science, cliche to say, and I thought of myself as being a vet or a doctor someday. Then in high school, I briefly considered studying other things like education or even Japanese, and music. But then my first summer following freshman year of college, I worked in California for a family service agency, mainly cleaning house for the elderly, but we were also instructed on how to hook them up with various social service agencies in the community and whatnot, and we ended up spending time with the clients as well. So I listened to a lot of stories, a lot of medical complaints, and realized that I really liked that, and liked being kind of a detective and finding out what would work well for someone in terms of other services and stuff like that.
Interesting way to put it, being a detective.
That's yeah. So, and then already liking science and having that background, because there's also taking biology courses and a biology major and college double major. So.
Yeah. Now, how did you decide then on doing OB-GYN? How did that fit in with your personality, interest in medicine?
Well, growing up, my father being a physician, I really didn't have formal office visits.
Right.
And, he was very, very hands off. If it hurts, don't walk on it, that kind of attitude. So really didn't have a formal contact with the medical profession until high school, and it was time to have, your first physical exam. And so I just kind of interfaced with medicine in terms of just general health care, reproductive health care. And when I was thinking about medical school, it was important to me to kind of be able to see a specific career.
Right.
And I consider myself a feminist and read Our Bodies Ourselves in college, and was just really motivated by that too, just women taking control of their own health care.
Yeah.
And so that is what motivated me to become an obstetrician
so kind
gynecologist.
of went in hand with this. Now, for people who are looking into going into medicine, what can someone who is expecting to go into the field of being an obstetrician or gynecologist, what can they expect to get from that career?
Well, it's very rewarding to me. I mean, I counsel all the medical students I advise that it's important to find your passion and follow it, because don't worry about the hours or the schedule so much as what you're passionate about. Otherwise, you'll just burn out no matter what, because it can be demanding schedule-wise. But in OBGYN, we have so much variety. We do a combination of primary care, well women visits, etc., a lot of preventive medicine, family planning. But we also do a lot of office procedures, and we also do surgery and obstetrics and deliveries. So it's
a lot of different
all across the board. So that's what I like about it. And it's very hands-on, very active, and like the labor floor can sometimes have an ER atmosphere, and I like that.
Cool. So how have you seen medicine for women and women's reproductive health, primary care for women, in the decade or more that you've been a practitioner? How have you seen that change?
Well, as the the women's movement helped with the consumerist movement in medicine, and getting away from paternalistic medicine, and we continue to see that even in current times, just always increasing. But the pendulum swings back and forth. I mean, first, for a while, we were criticized for doing too many hysterectomies and whatnot, and we got away from that, more medical management as opposed to surgical management of conditions, but we still have lots of people who really want that, and now we make them jump through hoops to get that. There's more of a focus on preventive medicine, holistic medicine, treating the whole patient, also minimally invasive surgery. So,
what is this paternalistic idea of medicine? What are symptoms of that in society?
Symptoms of it in society?
Yeah, of paternal medicine. So how can a patient know if they're, seeing sort of that negative aspect of care?
That's a hard question to answer. Let me think about that. Well, when you think of paternalistic medicine, you think of kind of the old stereotype of doctor telling the patient what he or she thinks they should do.
Right.
not giving them options. And now we are, as I said, we're moving away from lots of old types of treatments. Surgery is the mainstay, and looking at more medical management. So patients have tons of options, and sometimes it's overwhelming for them, and they do kind of ask your opinion. But important to kind of lay out all the information, tell them about the studies, the advantages, disadvantages, try to tailor it to the individual, but then ultimately the patient has to decide. And if a patient's read about something on the internet, take fibroid embolization as an example, and their gynecologist says, "No, I don't believe that that's a good procedure." If they just kind of stop it short, then that's a red flag. They should at least be able to explain all the pros and cons.
Right, and present those options. So as an instructor in the College of Medicine, is it something that you try to focus in order to help your students sort of see that point of view of presenting an array of options and presenting?
Yes, and that's another way that medicine's been continually evolving, more emphasis on evidence-based medicine. So really educating the students on what is evidence-based, what isn't evidence-based, and then carrying that over to the patients and giving them the statistics, the numbers, the studies even. I mean, patients are very savvy and pretty well educated these days. So,
is there a philosophy or an approach that you take to medicine as a practitioner, as a teacher?
Well, I try to practice the golden rule and just, treat my patients as I would want to be treated, or I would want my family members to be treated personally. So, and so I personally would want all the options laid out and explained to me. So,
now you have done quite a bit in the Iowa City community, as well as in the University of Iowa community, to be an activist, and as well as in the national community too. And we'll get to that in a little bit, and how you had testified in federal court. But what have you done at the local Iowa City level? What groups have you started, been a part of, to try to change the culture of Iowa City and the way people view women's health care and reproductive health?
Well, I really started becoming an activist in medical school, and I helped found the local chapter of Medical Students for Choice. It was the national organization was started when I was in medical school, so that was exciting. And then I also served as the president of the American Medical Student Association here on campus. And then in residency in New York City, long work hours. Didn't do as much. So planned, though, afterward to try to get more involved in organizations such as the National Organization for Women, because I'd seen Patricia Ireland speak at an AMSA conference in medical school, and that made an impression on me. So I wanted to get involved in that. So when I came back to Iowa City, I looked for the chapter. It was hard to find. And then eventually attended an organizational meeting and ended up kind of restarting the chapter and leading that for a few years. But it was hard. It was hard to we had a lot of members on paper, but only a handful of core people who would attend meetings and events and whatnot. So it's hard to get it off the ground.
Is now still active right now in Iowa City, or
it is not, unfortunately. Yeah, it is at the state level. So
gotcha.
And then so I ended up turning my efforts elsewhere. Participated as a plaintiff in the lawsuit against the federal abortion ban, and then I'm currently serving my third year on the board of the Iowa Abortion Access Fund, and serving as president this year.
What does that group do, the Iowa Abortion Access Fund?
Well, it's an organization that raises money to help subsidize abortions for Iowa women who otherwise couldn't afford it. And it's actually one of the oldest such funds in the country.
Really?
Yeah.
Do most states have a fund like this? Really? So how would a woman who is unable to pay for an abortion, how would they go about getting help from the Iowa Abortion Access Fund?
Well, usually they contact one of the clinics that provides these services, and the clinic then refers them to us.
And you've also been working as the liaison for the University of Iowa to the Emma Goldman Clinic, correct?
Yes.
How have you been involved then in what goes on at the Emma Goldman Clinic, and why is there a link? Why does it benefit the University of Iowa community to have a link between the medical school and the university to Emma Goldman?
Well, before I started working at the University of Iowa, the Department of OB/GYN had set up a contract with the Emma Goldman Clinic to provide a venue for medical student education, resident training in abortion. But they're still an independent clinic, so we provide, it's optional for members of our department to staff the clinic, optional for medical students and residents to rotate through it. So they're doing a lot for the university for training future physicians and providers. So it's important to just kind of keep the communication open. I attend the medical director quarterly meetings where we discuss quality assurance issues and work on updating protocols and process improvements and all that kind of exciting stuff. But if there's any issues on their side or on our side, I'm
the go-between.
The go-between, exactly.
Now, you touched on this very briefly. You were one of the plaintiffs in the federal abortion ban in Nebraska a couple years ago. Can you tell for our guest what was going on regarding abortion and the law that was at stake, and your role, how you were picked to be a plaintiff in this case?
Right. So Congress passed a federal abortion ban, the so-called ban against so-called partial birth abortion, which was very vague. There was no discussion of a specific gestational age range. The procedure could have been interpreted to even include the most common and safest method of second trimester abortions, D&E procedures, at the time, and it did not include a health exception for women if a physician thought this procedure would be best in a certain circumstance. So multiple lawsuits were filed, and I participated in the Center for Reproductive Rights lawsuit along with 3 other plaintiffs, the most famous one being Dr. Carhart in Nebraska, who was also a plaintiff in the previous Supreme Court case. What was the rest of the question? How I was picked? They came to Iowa because when they were working on fighting some of the similar state bans, many members of the Department of OB/GYN signed a letter against the bans, against similar bans. So they came to Iowa, but this law was more specific to second trimester abortions, and I was one of the main providers of those. So that's how I got involved.
And I guess they felt like the department, there was quite a bit of support for
right, yes. So
for getting rid of the ban. So what was that like, being asked questions in court? Was it scary? Was it empowering? How did you feel?
So one of the things I had to do was a deposition, and the DOJ lawyers came to Iowa City for that. But I think it took all day, about 8 hours, if I remember correctly. So that was pretty painful. And I thought they would be asking questions about medicine, about specific cases or pregnancy complications or things like that. But no, they just wanted to know the nitty-gritty of the procedures. And to be honest, you don't think to that level of detail during a procedure. It's so it was painful. And then I testified in the Nebraska federal court, and that went well. I was a little nervous because the previous day they had some protesters, including somebody driving a semi around with some graphic anti-abortion photos. So I was a little nervous. I thought, okay, there could be a gunman, there could be whatever, but I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that that's what I was meant to be doing. So I testified, and then I was able to attend the oral arguments at the Supreme Court. And of course, we ultimately lost, but the experience, I don't regret my involvement, and overall it was very personally empowering. I did receive a lot of support from the community and the department and the campus with the Jean Jew Award. So that was very rewarding.
Now, when you lost, what was their argument against all the evidence and the testimony that you guys provided?
Yes, it was very demoralizing. The majority opinion was written by Justice Kennedy, and it was very paternalistic, demeaning to doctors, to abortion providers, to women. It was, based on not legal precedents, because they reversed a decision with, the previous decade, even though our case was much stronger. It was based on junk science. I don't even want to use the word science, but junk psychology, this idea that abortion harms women, which is definitely not supported by current medical expert consensus and the medical literature. So.
Yeah. It's amazing, and it's great being able to talk to you and see that even though the end result wasn't what you and the people who were in the case had initially hoped for, that you can still get an empowering feeling from being a part of that fight and being a part of that. A part of a debate that is incredibly long. I know, how do you feel in terms of going on right now? There still is so much back and forth with the Stupak Amendment thrown in for healthcare reform. What do you see as the future for women and abortion rights?
Well, I'm optimistic, despite the setbacks, including the recent healthcare reform debate in which abortion was demonized, really marginalized, which is unfortunate. But I see more women going into politics. I see more pro-choice people winning elections, and all of that gives me hope. And then on the global scale, we see other countries really advancing, really realizing this is a fundamental human rights issue, and to have healthy families and societies, you have to start with women's reproductive rights. So on the global scale, there's been a lot of progress, even if it seems like we're going backwards at some point. But, I can't quote this exactly, but like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, the arc of, we can't use that, bends towards justice, so.
Very
Can't remember
interesting.
the exact quote there.
Perspective,
Sorry.
though, to look at that. No.
Yes.
Now, one thing that I found really interesting, and we were talking about this a little bit before, it was that the vagueness of the law that was passed. Now, what does that mean for women? Is it a good thing that it's vague? Is it a bad thing that it's vague? What do you do with that health exception clause that was thrown in there? Does it still include life exception? How does that work?
So what I testified was that this could cover D&E procedures.
Right.
And
what is D&E procedure?
Stands for dilation and evacuation. So it's the most common, safest method of second trimester abortion termination. So, and so it basically can criminalize what I do, and many providers stopped doing that procedure, or they added a second unnecessary procedure, amniocentesis, to induce fetal demise prior. So it's limiting the options for women, and then it kind of chills the environment in terms of young medical students, residents, looking at whether they want to go into this type of medicine, knowing that things they can do can be put them in jail if somebody kind of interprets it according to this law. So
scary.
Yeah, and the health exception was basically thrown out the window. So the life exception is still in place, but that's just a very gray area in terms of, is it a threat to a woman's life if she may not necessarily die without having an abortion, but her life expectancy is shortened, that kind of thing in the long term. So it's just gray area.
Yeah. How has that changed your practice?
I haven't changed my practice. I mean, I basically am on public record, and in the court documents it's saying, this is what I do, this is what I try to do. It doesn't always turn out that way, but that is my ultimate goal. And Justice Kennedy did state, in his opinion, if you're setting out to do a standard D&E and it doesn't end up that way, he didn't consider that being covered by the Act, but that doesn't mean any other lawyer or judge would agree with him. But I've chosen not to add the amniocentesis to induce fetal demise because it's an unnecessary expense, burden, discomfort, health risk to the patient with no medical benefit.
Yeah. Would you go and testify again if you were asked?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to continue speaking truth to power and standing up for what I believe. And
yeah. Now, after you went and testified, you were given on campus the Jean Meadows Award for Women's Rights. How did that feel? How did you feel receiving that award?
It was wonderful. When I started doing more of this public activist work for reproductive rights, I mean, you do stick your neck out. You know, many of my colleagues across the country have been the target of harassment and threats and violence and vandalism, and so that was always there in the back of my mind. But instead, my activism had the opposite response. So community support, departmental support, etc. So very encouraging.
Definitely.
I feel grateful to be able to live in a place like this. It's a little bit more civil than some other areas of the country where it's just much abortion providers are more under siege. So
yeah. And do you know much about other women who have received the award, or do you stay in contact with them, or?
Well, you mentioned earlier Susan Johnson. She won the award, so she's been a mentor of mine. And but I haven't. I mean, I've worked with Carla Miller and whatnot. I end up seeing them at a lot of women's events and things like that. And
that's neat. You still kind of keep.
I'm a fan from afar.
Yeah.
So,
what other women, either in your in the medical community or in any, I guess, physician or not on campus, have you, seen as a mentor or someone who sort of guided you along the path of feminism and feminism as long as with professionalism?
In college or here, anywhere? Yes. Okay. College, as I mentioned, my music professor, J. Michelle Edwards, she usually, no matter what the course subject, music history, theory, whatever, she still encouraged us to put things into a class and gender context. So, and discuss sexual politics, even when it came to sonatas and things like that. So, and operas. So she was inspiring. And then here on campus, several members of my department have been mentors. Ann Laros and Ingrid Nygaard. They're no longer in the department, but they were always encouraging.
Right. What would you recommend to women on campus to find out more about feminism, particularly about reproductive health and getting involved in things like the Abortion Access Fund or getting involved in more pro-choice causes? How can you...
Well, there's many groups on campus that are working on these issues. So the Women's Resource and Action Center, of course, and the Feminist Majority, and then the Medical Students for Choice in the medical school, and the Law Students for Reproductive Justice in the College of Law. In terms of good internet resources, prochoice.org, and then groups like NARAL, Pro-Choice America, National Organization for Women, etc. They're
good places
doing a
to
lot
check
nationally.
out.
Yeah.
We had talked about this a little before when we were speaking together. How do you feel about, and as you've worked as a physician for the last few years, and even as a feminist for your entire life, how have you seen the use of that language change and saying that people who are against abortion are pro-life? How do you feel those language gives that connotation?
Yeah, I don't use the term pro-life because I don't think it's well representative of that side, especially, one of my colleagues was assassinated in a Midwestern state last year. So it's very manipulative language, so I refer to anti-abortionists as anti-abortionists. And yes, there are many different viewpoints on when life begins. And I obviously don't believe it begins at conception. And I don't use that term.
Right.
So.
And one of the things I find really interesting about your personality is that I think there's a stereotype behind people who are pro-choice because you're very active in your church and very active in fellowship and Bible study. What would you say to people who, tell you that you can't be religious because, you're a woman who's pro-choice? How would you describe that feeling to another woman who is religious and pro-choice?
Well, I tell them I'm a born-again, Holy Spirit-filled Christian, and that this is my religious calling to be an abortion provider. I actually did study the Bible before ever doing an abortion, and decided it was pro-choice too. And then just throughout all my life experiences and work, it's just been reaffirmed. I've just grown stronger in my convictions. That women are co-creators with God, and that we can help, make our own choices and help determine our destinies. So
right, I think that's very interesting. Not that the people on the other side have a hold on who can be religious and who can't be religious.
Right. So there's a good national organization called the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, and they have a lot of literature on this subject too. There's lots of, including scriptural interpretations and whatnot, and on the morality of abortion, and I think.
Do you feel supported?
Very moral. I mean, good women have abortions for very good reasons.
Do you feel sort of that within this, do you feel supported by your faith and your church as well, and all that you've had to go through, the stress of needing to testify and things like that?
At one point, I attended a different church, and it was overall supportive. When I was involved in the lawsuit, there were articles in the paper, the New York Times, stuff like that, with my name in them, and then the Jean Jew Award and things. And at my previous church, this little 70, 80-year-old woman came up to me and said, I used to think this was black and white, but then one of my students, she must have been a teacher way back when, died of an illegal abortion, and she said, I've been pro-choice ever since.
Yeah.
So that really spoke to me. So there may have been others that minister said, one family did leave the church because I was there, but I never knew about it until afterwards. There may have been others, but they chose to keep quiet. So the only people who expressed their opinion were actually supportive. So it was wonderful. And my current church is very supportive. I mean, we're a very diverse body, and we accept differing viewpoints and whatnot. So,
well, that's very interesting. It's neat to. You're a very multifaceted personality, and on that, I wanted to ask you. I had read that you have your pilot's license. Is that correct?
Yes,
it's entirely off topic.
Not active by any means, but
I found that so interesting.
Yes.
Because you said one of your feminist moments was getting that license.
Right, taking the test in a room full of young men, and I was the only female. And it just kind of a wake-up call. And why is this? Because, yes, I was privileged to have that opportunity, but definitely not biology. I mean, of course I can fly a plane and learn that, and so I just think it's cultural and conditioning of women not to encourage them to.
And going into medicine, when you started your med school class, did you feel at that time that in the field of medicine that it was similar to your experiences getting your pilot's license, or do you think it was a lot better off in terms of equality for the sexes?
A lot better. So at that time we were close to 50% female in medical school. And the class here at Iowa was not very competitive, had a very cooperative environment, and the professors were very civil and professional. And then, of course, going into obstetrics and gynecology, it's now becoming more and more female-dominated. It's probably 50-50, but 90% of the residents are female, and so I'm surrounded by and work with a lot of wonderful women. So,
do you think that's it's a good shift to have more women involved in obstetrics and gynecology?
Well, it makes sense to me. I mean, a lot of women are like me. They might prefer female physicians and be attracted to this specialty because that's what they relate to in medicine. Right. But we do, have wonderful male physicians as well, and we encourage male medical students to go into this field. We want the creme de la creme. We want, a good. We want diversity. And,
So now, what are you, in terms of your future with activism, where do you think you will focus your attentions next?
Well, as you know, I'll be leaving my current position at the university in a couple months, and I'll be becoming the medical director of Planned Parenthood of the Heartland. So I'll get to do family planning full-time, which is my passion, and work with like-minded activists and committed individuals. So,
how do you think that'll change your views of medicine and practicing?
Well, for me, I've done OB and surgery for 15 years. And I've been here at the university 11 years. For me, it means no more call or nights or weekends. So it helps me spend more time with my family. And I'm ready. I'm ready to focus more full-time on family planning and have those efforts be appreciated.
Definitely. Will we still have you here in the Iowa City community for a while then?
For now.
Good.
Yes, for now.
Now, we ask this question to all of our guests. Is there a book or a piece of literature that you recommend our audience read so that they kind of have a better understanding about how things work in your mind?
The book that came to mind was Dance of the Dissident Daughter by Sue Monk Kidd. So it's a nonfiction work. She's a religious author. And this book is a memoir. It's about her personal feminist awakening, which didn't really occur until, because she was a Christian writer, homemaker, wife, mother, and she witnessed some men making derogatory comments about her teenage daughter, I believe, in a grocery store. And then that was her aha moment, and then her whole life changed after that. And I never had an aha moment like that in terms of my feminism, but she writes about how that changed her spirituality, how it changed the way she viewed the world, it's just how it changed her marriage, everything.
Right.
And very insightful, and I relate to, of course, kind of the spirituality aspects of it too.
And it, kind of going on that in terms of, because you have a daughter as well, a daughter and a son, how does it feel being, knowing that you are very successful in your career, that you are a feminist and being a mother? There's that quote that you can't have it all. Do you feel like you can?
Yes, you can. I do feel very blessed to have a wonderful career and quality time with my children and a wonderful husband and all that good stuff. So I feel very fortunate. I did go through a divorce, and I'm just felt very grateful that I actually did have my career, that I could be self-sufficient and support my family and not rely on a partner per se.
Right.
And then,
Right. Well, that's a very, very good way to put it. Very, very nice way. Now, as you're leaving, for the time being, leaving in some part the University of Iowa community, is there something that you see that the University of Iowa still needs to work on to make things even better for women on campus?
well, there's always tons of work to be done. So speaking of another Jean Jew winner, the more recent one, Monique DiCarlo, very happy that she's doing her work on sexual assault and whatnot on campus. In terms of the medical side of things, it's a hard one.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into trouble. I just think, because I've been so empowered by speaking out and acting out my beliefs, that I'm surrounded by people and women and patients who have similar beliefs but don't vocalize them, don't act on them. And I just believe we could break down so much stigma and make so many political gains if people would just speak out with authority and speak their truth and tell their stories. So that's the main thing, and it's at all levels, students, professors, leaders, politicians.
Well, thank you. It's very good advice to share with our community. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you want to be able to let everyone at the University of Iowa know about you and the way you view life?
The way I view life. Oh my goodness, no pressure or anything. No, just that, again, I'd go back to, if you follow your heart and your passion, then everything else will fall into place. And no fear. That's my other philosophy. No fear. So
great. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It was great speaking with you, and we appreciate having you aboard. And thank you again for tuning into Women at Iowa.